share the The actual question, in my opinion, is kind of clunky, and it's an uncomfortable question because it makes it very awkward to answer. And I'll explain what I mean as soon as I share this link real fast.
Don't worry, we're used to
Clunky, I like
multitasking all the time.
Yeah. I can live with clunky. Try to say more words with R's so that Iseth can respond in turn. Like brain.
It's her native tongue, R. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay, so
I can't do that.
back to what I believe. So I take the Bible as literally as the original writers intended it to be taken literally. There are obviously different genres of the Bible. There's historical prose, there's poetry, there's apocalyptic literature. And according to the genre that is being written, I take it on face value. So if it's historical narrative and it looks very easily like it's supposed to be taken literally, then I'm going to take that at face value. But if it's poetry and there's lots of like parabolic or metaphorical, metaphors to communicate a spiritual truth, then I'm going to take it as metaphor. But even still, in some strictly historical accounts, there are phrases that are meant to be taken figuratively. Jesus calls himself the door and the way, but obviously he's not a door. We're called branches that are grafted into the olive tree of Israel, but we're obviously not branches. So it's very basic common sense human language that we interpret according to how it's supposed to be taken. I feel that the question is...
Sorry, can I just have a weird question? Because you say you take it as literal as the people who wrote it intended it to be. Now, we have a lot of contemporary writers, and even the people of the same time who read their books don't necessarily take them the way they meant it to be taken. So how can you know that you actually take them the way that they meant them to be?
Yeah, of course. That's a very valid question. And lots of Christians have struggled with it, but the basic answer is you interpret it according to the tools that you've been given. Like there's a whole area of study, hermeneutics, where they learn to interpret things according to the tools that were given them. They use the original languages. They use the historical context in which those things were written. They use very basic common sense skills. And basically, best opinion, you can defend what you believe Bible is saying and the other guy can't, then I think the guy with the defense wins.
I think that one thing needs to be pointed out, though, real quick. There's a distinct difference between what we would call inerrant and infallible, right? And inerrancy would be that you believe or hold the position that the Bible contains no errors or mistakes. Infallible would be the position that there cannot be any mistakes, right? So when Iseth is asking you, what's that, Kyle?
I was just going to point out that when he said that you can't take Jesus when it says he is a door as literal, there is a song called "Oh Come Let Us Adore Him." So I think that might steer towards him actually being a door.
Could possibly be, but
you're free to believe that.
When you're talking about inerrancy, when somebody is using a metaphor, as you're saying, that's clearly not an error. That's just metaphorical language and allegorical parables and things of that nature, right? So you're saying that you hold a position that the Bible is inerrant and infallible, which means it can't have any mistakes, but those are not mistakes. Those are just metaphors, right?
Well, I mean, I think we're going into a different conversation at that point. I wasn't talking about infallibility or inerrancy. I was talking about hermeneutics. I was talking about how to interpret the Bible and whether it should be interpreted literally or figuratively. If we want to go that direction, we can.
I have another question, because you said, sorry, but that just, sticks to me. Every time someone says it, it sticks to me. It's like common sense. There is not one person on this universe that has, the same common sense as everyone else. Everyone has his own personalized common sense. And then you said the person with the argument, when talking about the Bible, the person with the argument is the one who, wins in a debate. And, might be good and well, but like when you have someone who has an argument but makes a very nasty comment, very nasty, maybe not nasty, very fallible argument, but the other person cannot respond, then it is still a fallible argument. Like, for example, if I say, okay, let me think, the square is not a square, it's a glorified circle. And then I bring up the argument that a circle has just infinite squares and just like 4 are stretched out a bit, and therefore, a square is a circle. And the other person comes to me and is like, no, actually a circle is a circle and it's not a square. But that person has not an argument. That wouldn't necessarily make me right.
Right. And I think that's a very crude analogy. I'll accept it, but even then we're talking about definition. Agreed upon human terminology should know what a basic circle and a square looks like. And when you call a square a circle, obviously you're incorrect. And so in the same way with Scripture, when there's an agreed upon truth that what Scripture is saying in one area and it seems to contradict another area, we make arguments based off of those truths that we already agree upon. It's really hard to think of an example, but we can go with the big, always talked about question is whether or not okay, I mean, I was going to go in a pretty racy area, but we'll hold off. Let's go to the 6-day creation. So some will argue that a day means a day, and they'll argue based off of language and off of the genre of Scripture and off of how interpretations have been handed down throughout the centuries. And others will point to other things and say, well, no, let's ignore all that and let's go with of outside of Scripture. And so now you're something outside of Scripture to influence your arguments. And so good conversations to have, and those are good debates to have, but still there is a foundational agreed upon use of language and terminology that can help us get through arguments like you posed, like what is a square and what is a circle. If that makes any sense. I hope it does.
So basically, I'm a foreigner. I take my time, be patient with me.
No, it's okay. Please.
The thing that I have learned, the one thing that you learn as a foreigner, no matter which language you learn, is that even if you agree upon one single definition, everyone interprets it still differently. So you can say everyone, let's agree upon a square, and if you say square, everyone imagines more or less ish a square. They will never have the same square in mind. It just doesn't happen. It's the same with every single word. I have experienced that the hard way. So this idea that, we agree upon basis. Yeah, we can say, okay, now we set up definitions and then we agree upon these definitions, and on these definitions we work on. I find it very, very hard to imagine that there are many people who can actually share this very same basis all the time, because especially when we talk about the Bible, there are thousands upon thousands different interpretations and different ways of interpreting things and different ways of seeing things and passing them on, and one says this is metaphorical, one says this is metaphorical, they all point at the Bible. You never really know where you're at. So how can you actually consider the same basis as a basis? I don't think there is a common basis. I don't know how to define this.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
I understand.
I mean, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, it's perfect. I understand and validate a point, but at the same time, there comes a point where there is very basic.
Eric,
I can't hear.
Yeah, Eric, you might want to turn off your video. I think your bandwidth's not the greatest.
Or just hit F5 first.
Or hit F5 and come back in. Yeah, try that first. At F5, it'll bring you back into the F5. You're going to exit you and then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let me give that a try.
Should refresh you. And I'm interested to.
My F5 isn't working very well. Maybe I can just exit and come back.
Yeah, just hit the refresh.
The refresh. Hit the refresh button
in your browser. But I think Iseth makes a good point that you can't. It's hard to kind of come to this on one single. There you go.
Is that better?
Now I'll say something. See if that's seems to be.
Hello?
We won't know till you start talking. But
yeah,
do you remember where you left off?
I was basically responding to, and I'm sorry, I forget your name.
Don't worry,
Iseth.
just call me you. It's fine.
We just call her the voice.
The voice. Okay. Sure, go with voice.
Yeah. Basically,
Rachel.
I was affirming what she was saying to a degree, where we do have a lot of people giving their best interpretation of the text, and honestly, in my experience, a lot of those times they're missing some information that would greatly help them. And oftentimes people's traditions or their own biases do get in the way of the text. And I won't say that I'm exempt from that either. But there are errors in our interpretations. And I think the better understanding we have of those biases and those things that get in the way, we can get to a more pure interpretation of what the text was actually saying. And what I mean by that is what the original writers actually intended to communicate. And I think we do that with all sorts of literature. We do that with all sorts of ancient documents. I don't think the Bible's any different. I think we can get to a very pure interpretation of what the writers intended. I think that is possible.
There is something to be said, obviously, for when you do exegesis or textual criticism. You are trying to at least understand it from the period that it was written, correct? From the mind of the person who wrote it, and we do that in any kind of literature, not just the Bible. So I don't think it's fair to say that there's no standard to be used. I mean, yes, it's interpretation, but I think there can be some consensus to say back then when they used this type of terminology or phrasing, this is what it meant at the time. This is what they were referring to. I think that could be something that's considered to be somewhat standardized if you're doing proper exegesis on it. Would that be true?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Are we talking to me?
Iseth, would you agree? Would you agree on that?
Okay. Sure. No, it's fine. No, the next question I have, let me just put my cards on the table here. I am super curious about you. I have not had the pleasure to meet someone who is like a real Bible literalist. And I'm just, taking this occasion. I'm just like asking you questions and sucking all this information in. I'm really sorry. I'm being a vampire here. So the things that confuse me a bit, the things that fascinate me a bit, I might not necessarily like counter you or something. Because I'm just way too fascinated about what you think and especially how you think. But there are so many questions I have, so I hope you indulge if I just, keep on asking weird questions. The first
that's fine.
very curious question that I have is, how can you decide, first of all, which version of the Bible do you use? And how do you decide that this is the version that is accurate? Because I was raised Catholic, with like Catholic in school. I don't know how, genuine that is. Ask my teacher. But they had several different, interpretations and several different gospels, and some got in and some did not, and some choose this and some choose that. It was a mess. It was a huge, huge mess. How do you decide what is accurate, what is genuine, and what is not, to then, interpret the way you do?
It's a wonderful question, and I really appreciate it. I wish that many Christians would ask that question. I will say, first of all, that I am a Protestant Christian. I do consider myself to be in the tradition of the Reformers, who had very, very convictional reasons for leaving the Catholic Church, and I believe they still hold today. Some of those issues that you mentioned about some things that were in, some things that were out, you're referring to the Apocrypha, where they have an extra, I think it's around 12 books that Protestants don't consider scripture. That was a big mess. But to answer your question, what Bible I think is the most correct one, obviously I think it's going to be whatever modern Greek version is out there. I am currently learning Koine Greek. I'm learning to read the text in which the New Testament was written. So in my bookshelf over there, I have the Nestle Allen 27th edition. I honestly believe that if Christians really want the truth, then that's kind of what they'll aspire to. I think there's nothing wrong with some of the English versions. And here's another thing about me is that I study textual criticism. This is something that I take seriously. And so I know when there are things in some translations that are inaccurate. And quite frankly, there are some. I'm not a huge fan of the New Living Translation, but it's very popular nowadays. Even the NIV has issues in it that I don't appreciate. I read the ESV because I feel that it's the best, and the ESV stands for English Standard Version. I believe it's the best combination between dynamic and formal dynamic and formal equivalent translation. So it translates not only the thoughts, but also the very words as much as possible. There are translations like the